What's good, everybody? It's your brother Mad Black, the most dangerous and the most toxic black man on the internet. And I am black up in your face again with some more pro black commentary. So, I did not get a chance to talk about this when it first happened, but I wanted to bring some attention to this story and give you some broader analysis as to this type of incident. So, what I'm talking about is the lynching death of the young brother Trey Reed in Mississippi. He was found hanging from a tree in on Delta State University, I think, on the campus itself. So, his family got the news that this young brother was found hanging, and there has been a lot of speculation around or surrounding his death. Because, of course, anytime an incident happens like this in the modern day, what the local law enforcement likes to do is just say, well, it was just a suicide. This black man just killed himself. Not in private, not, he didn't choose to shoot himself, he didn't choose to take some pills. No, he decided to hang himself from a tree in in the open of a campus, right? He didn't even like go out in like the woods somewhere. He decided to go hang himself where everyone could see. So that type of nonsense is what got people on social media looking more into this story. For one thing, it happened in Mississippi, which is sad to say. I mean, one of the lynching capitals of the United States. That's kind of part of their culture down there is to lynch black males. So it's like trying to make it seem like it was just a suicide or just automatically jumping to the conclusion that it was a suicide is doing a disservice to the history of that area. But also, we have to understand that this happened right after the white supremacist bigot shill Charlie Kirk got murdered. And when as soon as that other mayonnaise mutant shot Charlie Kirk and made his neck twerk, that all of the mayonnaise mutants around the country and all the bigots around the country felt like it was their obligation to get mobilized and to strike back against black people, because black people are the scapegoats for everything. And even though it was a white male that killed Charlie Kirk, and Charlie Kirk was killed on a white campus in front of a group of white people in basically an all white town, they still felt like they had to go retaliate and get revenge and do it on black people. That's why there has been so many threats against these HBCUs. And you saw very recently those two clowns tried to go and do a debate, quote unquote, at TSU. But in my opinion, what they were doing there is probably doing surveillance, probably trying to get a layout of the land so that at some future point that they could commit an act like what happened to Trey Reed. These demons, they like to go there and do a little recon before they do their devilish acts. So, in my opinion, a lot of these HBCUs and a lot of these colleges that are mainly for black people need to be on high alert for situations like this. And I do feel for a lot of the young black people who are going to these schools that where they might be the only black people there, because they'll automatically become a target of these demons out here, right? So the situation that happened with Trey Reed, I feel bad for his family. I think it's very sad. And what I want to get across to my audience is that, sad to say, this is nothing new. The lynchings never stopped in this country. A lot of people think that lynchings only existed, during Reconstruction, or lynchings only existed during, the Jim Crow era. That's not true. Okay, that the lynchings never stopped in this country. Lynchings have been going on in this country since this country was its very first inception. Okay, they were lynching black people pre-revolution. They were lynching black people post-revolution. You know, any black person who was not a slave was still a target of lynching. And sometimes they will lynch their slaves as well. You know, the slaves had somewhat some protection because they were property, but if they just happened to find any black person anywhere, there would be a lynching. And anytime there was a slave uprising, they would just start lynching blacks at random, right? Just because of their paranoia of blacks possibly retaliating against the slave system. There was also a very famous incident where they were having the draft riots before the or during the Civil War, and they were hanging black people in New York City and burning down black orphanages in New York City because they were upset that they were going to get possibly drafted to fight in the Civil War. This was not a southern city, this was in New York City. So, once again, we need to understand that lynchings started in this country and just kept on going. All right, lynchings happened in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and all the way through into the 2000s. The only difference now is the law enforcement tries to play these games where they make it seem as if these these black males who are found hanging, that they committed suicide, that they killed themselves. And like I said, it makes no sense for a black person to, if they're going to take their own lives, to do it in a public setting like that. That makes no sense whatsoever. But you know, these people want to play these games where they make it seem as if it must be the black person's fault. They had to blame the black person somehow. You know, back during Reconstruction, what they would do is say that this black person was murdered because he was doing something wrong or doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. Now they've kind of taken that excuse and they've transferred it on to these legal lynchings that go on with these police, right? So people need to also start thinking that when you see these situations where innocent black people are murdered by the police, it doesn't really qualify as a lynching because the black person is not being hanged, but that is just as much of a lynching as a black person being strung up on a tree. Okay, but now you got these legal lynchings done by these police officers because they got a badge and they feel that they have the right to take a black person's life. And this is across the board. It's not just white police officers who do this, because I told you about the story that happened in Memphis with a whole squad of black police officers, part of these one of these narcotics or hard-hitting squads called the Scorpion Squad, where they killed a black man out in public, right? So it goes with the mentality of police culture where it's okay for them to murder a black person. And it extends beyond the police to where you have these maniacs like George Zimmerman or Daniel Penny who think that they have the right to take the life of a black person. And then they sit there and they'll lie and say, well, they were just either defending themselves or they just had no choice but to kill that black person because the black person was a threat to everyone else, right? So, and then the system itself will back these people up. Well, they will let these people off and support them, and that will basically create another version of a legal lynching. So we need to understand that those types of things never stopped happening in this country. And sad to say, the brother Trey Reed is just a recent version of that. But even if you look at some of these other incidents like Ahmaud Arbery, where he was killed by the McManus family, that's a lynching. When you think about the sister Sonia Massey, where those cops came into her house and shot her in the head, that was a lynching. Botham Jean killed in his house by that weirdo white Bart Simpson looking female, that was a lynching. George Floyd, a knee on his neck until he died, that was a lynching. The situation that happened with Eric Gardner, where he was choked to death by the NYPD, that was a lynching. So all through all these incidents, we have these lynchings done to black people, and everyone from Oscar Grant to Sean Bell, It's no different. Okay, so don't get it twisted and think that, well, if you just see a black person hanging from a tree, that is the only thing that qualifies as a lynching. No, lynching and killing black people, especially innocent black people, is a part of American culture. You know, it's always interesting when you have these so-called uh, sociologists talk about, black on black crime is a part of black culture, or criminality is a part of black culture, but they never want to talk about the murder of black people is a part of American culture. That's especially a part of white American culture. And white America knows that, but they rarely like to say it out loud in front of everybody. But that is a part of American culture. And in fact, if you really want to have some or do any type of real study and correlation, the murder of black people and the lynchings of black people by these white races and law enforcement, everybody else, and the fact that a lot of these criminals that get away with killing black people get away with it is part of the reason why you might have a situation where there is quote unquote black on black crime, or why black people within their own community have so much low self-esteem because they figure, hell, I've been raised in a society where my life means nothing. I've been raised in a society where it means absolutely, if someone kills me or some other race kills me, that person won't even get in trouble. So why should I have value in my own life? Why should I care what happens to my fellow black person? Why shouldn't I care if I kill this other black person? No one cares about us anyway. So that is the mentality from that culture that can be filtered in to black people in that way. And that's something really that truly needs to be studied in that regard when it comes to how black people view each other is based on how American culture views us and how it's so easy to take our lives and take advantage of us in that way, and there's no repercussions for it, right? So that's something to think about, and that's something I might do in another video where I can kind of look at that with and show more evidence where it comes to that type of mentality. But getting back to the legal lynchings here in the United States, once again, something you need to understand: lynchings never stopped. Okay, they've kept on going, and it could happen just because white people are having a bad day. It can happen because white people feel like a black person is somewhere that a black person should not be. It can happen if black people are having some success. There was a lot of famous incidents where there were lynchings based on the boxer, one of the first black heavyweight champions, Jack Johnson. Anytime he won a boxing match and beat a white man, there would be black people lynched all around the country. You see, so if they even have a perception that black people are doing better than them, then they will commit a lynching of just some random black person. And you always notice it's always a black person who is basically innocent of anything. That's part of that killing culture. They have to kill a black person who's not doing anything. You notice that as much as these clowns out here, as much as they talk about Pookie and Ray Ray and black criminality, these fools never go after a black criminal. You ever notice that? For all the nonsense they talk about, uh, black gangbangers and gang violence, you never hear of a gangbanger getting lynched. You never hear of a gangbanger just accidentally getting shot by the police, right? It's always an innocent black person. It's always a black person who was a student, someone who was just walking somewhere, minding their own business, someone who was just going to work, right? It's always a defenseless, innocent black person who gets murdered by these demons, and that's part of their culture. It has to be that way because that's part of their demonic energy, and the glee that they get from it is the fact that they're killing a black person who is defenseless. Even if you talk about someone like George Floyd, trying to pay for something with counterfeit bills is not an automatic death sentence. That doesn't mean you need to be executed for that. Or being a drug addict does not mean that you need to be executed for that, because you see how white people treat their drug addicts. When it comes to their drug addicts, it's, hey, we need to get them help. We need to get them some Narcan. We need to do everything to help this community when it comes to white drug addicts. But with black people, it's okay to murder them and kill them in the streets. And you know that black person is out of their mind and they can't defend themselves, but you kill them anyway. That's part of the culture. They love doing that. So even with a young man like Trey Reed, a young student, he looks like a short young man too. He doesn't like he's a tall man. So they took advantage of that. Same thing when they killed people like Emmett Till and Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown and Aiyana Jones and Tamir Rice. Killing black children, someone who is defenseless and can't defend themselves, is part of their culture. Same way as killing someone like Breonna Taylor or Sonia Massey or Sandra Bland or Tatiana Jefferson. Killing women, so people who are defenseless and have no defense there, that is part of their culture. They get off on that. So you have to understand that when it comes to this culture and these demons, they love to kill people based on, it has nothing to do with that person doing something wrong or that person being a bad person. As much as they preach that nonsense, that's usually their justification as well. This black person got killed because of crime in Chicago or whatever type of deflection they try to give. You always notice the Negroes who are out here gang banging and wilding, those are the ones that never get killed. Those are the ones who never get lynched. It's always someone who is minding their own business. It's always someone who is innocent or who cannot defend themselves that winds up facing the wrath of these devils out here. So that's also something to think about. So you folks let me know how you feel about this in the comment section, and I would love to hear your opinions on this video. Anyway, Mad Black, and I will be back with my foot on the devil's back.